Buenos días a todas y todos y muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to thank you to the 6th meeting of Voices in Action, our special edition on creativity. We're at the Washington, D.C. headquarters of the IDB. I'm Camila Risa. I work at the Gender and Diversity Division of the IDB, and I describe myself as a white woman with straight, long hair, and I have a white shirt. For this edition, we have two international guests, and after our conversation with them, we'll be answering questions, so feel free to send your questions and comments on Zoom or through our platforms. Simultaneous interpretation into English and Portuguese is available, and there will also be subtitles available throughout. For this edition, we'd like to discuss accessibility and inclusion in the creative industries. And I would like to kick off with a question. When we talk about an event or some show that is suited for all audiences, what do you actually think we mean? Are we sure that it's suitable for all audiences? In my view, it means that anyone could take part in the event. Accessibility means that each and everyone will have an opportunity to enjoy cultural activities on an equal footing. And this includes people with disabilities. And let's consider for a moment what disability actually means. Disability is not the medical diagnosis. Disability, as currently defined by the social model, is the result of an interaction between a feature or trait in an individual and the barriers in their setting. For example, using a wheelchair is not in itself a disability, but if you place a staircase without a ramp or elevator to go somewhere, then you create a disability situation. This example is easy to understand, but the barriers for access to the creative industries are sometimes invisible. And this is laid bare when you want to go to a concert or movie theater, or when you want to see a play. And the solution may sometimes be seen as very simple, very costly. But nowadays, there are many reasonable adjustments that can be introduced to offer accessibility to all. And for this, and to answer the question as to how to do it, we have two very special guests with us today. It is my honor to introduce them. Inés Enciso, she's a cultural manager, and she received the gold medal of the Spanish Red Cross. She was a creator and co-director of the Different Look Festival. She's a member of the Union of Actors in Theater. She's a teacher of culture and diversity at different institutions, and currently coordinates research and development at the Film Academy. And thank you very much for accepting this invitation and for joining us from Spain. Thank you. We are also joined from Guadalajara, Mexico, by Sofia Olmos, who's an artist. She has a degree in communication science and technique. She has participated in numerous workshops on writing, narrative, children's literature, playwriting, acting, voice, singing, dance, among many other topics. She was one of the coordinators of the first project involving artists with disabilities in Mexico. She currently manages the Common Look project, an experience that invites us to become sensitive to people with disabilities. Again, I'd like to give you a warm welcome, and I would like to ask Maria Inés to tell us about her experience with creative industries. Thank you very much, Maria Camila, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'd like to start by thanking the IDB for the invitation and for opening up this space. It is important to think together about what measures we can introduce to deal with this complex matter, which inclusion is. And I've been asked to share with you the very powerful transformation experience we've gone through in Spain in recent years with regard to inclusion, visibility, and participation as regards people with disabilities. And the creative and cultural industries have played a key role and have become a pillar of the whole change, because culture affords an opportunity to discuss and to listen to other voices and experiences that are often silenced in daily life. And I'll tell you a bit about my background. I have a son, Mateo, who was born with a significant disability. Of course, this was a big shock, and I was focusing so much on the things he wouldn't be able to do. And of course, I was also thinking about all the special things that reflected his condition. I was sort of lost in a hazy world until I realized that the different perspective Mateo brought into my life completely transformed the way I saw the world and the people around me. So for the first time, I asked myself, what are we actually doing to include diversity in culture? This was something that I had never, ever asked myself. I took things for granted, and I started asking myself such simple things as, what if Mateo would ever like to be an actor or director? Would he be able to access training on an equal footing, or even simpler things? What if he wanted to go to the cinema or to the theater as a spectator? Would there be accessibility for him to be able to do that? But above all things, I began to wonder why on stages and screens, I didn't get to see all these different people I would run into on the streets, because it couldn't have to do with talent, because talent has to do with communicating and conveying emotions, and that has to do with the very essence of human beings, whatever their appearance. And what were creators and cultural managers doing wrong in order for our culture not to reflect that diverse society we live in? Back then, I was working at the National Drama Center, which is a major institution of performing arts in Spain, and Miguel Cuerdo and I suggested to the director, Ernesto Caballero, at the time, that we engage in this debate. We, as a public institution, should ensure this egalitarian participation. As Maria Camila said, this is a right that is recognized, and it wasn't yet taking place. The stages were not open to creators with disabilities. So we launched a project, the Different Look Festival, with this idea of opening up our stages to artists and professionals with disabilities who had been sort of more relegated to more amateur or underground or, off the main stage circuits. And there was this sort of glass ceiling that prevented them from having access to higher level spaces. And so we got in touch with professional associations, including artists with disabilities, and we also started evangelizing among other professionals, trying to reflect the fact that diversity is actually a valuable asset so as to try and allay the fear inherent in working with artists and performers with disabilities, trying to shift the focus from limitation. And so we set this project in motion and categorically asserting that we wanted the former state of affairs to end as soon as possible. It's exciting to launch a cultural process that would make a difference. And actually, we wanted to no longer be needed once the job was done. So for 8 years, we've been working with this festival. And since 2020, we have decided to change our format. And now all of the programs and activities at the National Drama Center throughout the year are inclusive. And in fact, you can see at the Valle Inclán Theatre, the Supernormales, Supernormal project with actors and actresses with different disabilities. And this showcases a very complex debate, like access to sexuality by people with disabilities. So it is something that may now not seem that extraordinary, but 10 years ago, it was really unheard of. And all of the job we have done has actually encouraged other cultural spaces to open up to diversity. And in a way, it did away with the excuses and with the disregard for these things we define as a right. And in order for this not to be focused only on Madrid, the capital city, and in social cities, sometimes in big cities, social discourse is a bit slower. In order to encourage smaller cities to join the pace of change, we created a commission on inclusion and mediation so that all theaters from smaller cities that we're really looking forward to starting to work on these measures for inclusion and accessibility, for them to be able to find a space where they would find support, would have a chance to air the fears, the doubts, and where they would find a catalog of inclusive shows that they could include in their activities. And another transformative experience has been the social inclusion conferences that take place in different cities across Spain. So what we do is we go to the cities, map the activities and experiences related to inclusion and mediation in the cities, and then get down to work with other projects and cities in Spain so as to create synergies and provide the stimulus for other projects to get started. I think now, 10 years after having started this change and revolution, I think we can proudly state that when it comes to performing arts in Spain, you can really see the change. The venues are open to inclusion, and of course, accessibility measures still offer room for improvement, but now you find a lot more than they used to be. And we have also made a great effort to improve access, but also, above all things, to persuade audience with disabilities that they can also take part in cultural activities, because they have not been heard in cultural institutions, and so they haven't been able to take advantage of culture offers. So we have done sort of piecemeal, door-to-door work, persuading them that things have opened up, that they come along and enjoy all of the menu of offers. So I think the transformation has been enormous, using the cultural industries as the common thread. And in Spain, we have had this hugely transformative process through the film Campeones, Champions, directed by Javier Fesser. And of course, cinema is a key loudspeaker. You can't compare it to the other theater, performing arts. And of course, this has enabled a transformation and a change in the view with regard to people with intellectual disabilities. Campeones is good in terms of inclusion because it shows the good things rather than focusing on the constraints and limitations. In this society where we always struggle to come up first, and Campeones talks about how great it is to come in second. Where are those who are second in this society? So Campeones has changed the way we look at disability in a society as a whole. One of the key characters, Sergio, said to me, now for the first time, I'm visible. For the first time, he felt that society wasn't turning its back. And Campeones was followed by other projects helping actors and actresses with disabilities to take part quite in a quite a mainstream way in other projects. And we have also started working with Netflix, also in this spirit of seeking to improve the storylines and the visibility of disabilities in the audiovisual field, but always placing the focus on the representatives of these groups, because it's important to hear the stories firsthand. And Roberto Pérez Toledo is a good example of a very powerful story. He passed away last year. He always used to say that fiction helps light up the way for many. And I think that is the sort of vision that creators and cultural managers should actually pursue. We need to be free to tell whatever story we want to tell, but also we should think about the fact that we can be a beacon and shine the light for many people who are in the shadows. We should also recognize and acknowledge those who are walking alongside us. What you don't see doesn't exist. And more we are convinced of the value that disability brings to our culture. I don't know if you got to see the Goya Awards. Ureta won the award, and he actually advocated for a more inclusive sort of filmmaking and with more diverse bodies. So I would like to wrap up by inviting us all to make sure that our culture leaves no one in the shadows. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Inés. Very interesting points you've made, and this greatly ties in with this slogan of nothing about us without us. So thinking about the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, that provides for measures related to accessibility to cultural venues. And this has to do with all the measures that will help people with disabilities make the most of all of their intellectual and artistic capability. And I would also like to invite Sofia to now expand and tell us about her experience within the creative industries. Good morning from Mexico and good afternoon, Spain. So, to start off, I am Sofia in Mexican Sign Language. This is my name, and I am wearing a green blouse and a necklace representing Frida Kahlo. I have long black hair, and the background behind me is white. I wear black frame glasses, and I wear red lipstick. The experience from an artistic perspective with regard to accessibility or the notions that have to do with disability, this can be approached from different standpoints, starting with the assumption that many of the models may be either medical, social, or cultural, and they might focus on a physical disability or on a structure that suggests that certain things can't be done. Again, the social and economic considerations. To what extent does a creator with a disability have an opportunity to attend shows or to create? And I try to see beyond the actual branch, because beyond the ramp. So, you know, everything is sort of looked at in terms of whether there is a ramp or not. And of course, that is a key point, but accessibility is more than just a ramp. The greatest experience I had regarding the questioning of accessibility was the Tracing Possibilities Festival in Guadalajara, which took place around the 3rd of December, the International Day of People with Disabilities. And around that date, there was another major event here, which was the International Book Fair. And that's when the problems started, you know, seeing that you had to look at the big picture. You know, for example, hotels. The share of hotels is really very low, those that could offer accessibility. And on top of it, the hotels in Guadalajara were overrun. So how could you have 8 people who need accessibility in a single hotel? There was no way you could do that. So it was about how to deal with the issues of mobility for vehicles that could have the benefit of a ramp, how you could get the taxis to take the people to the venues. So it's like having to wear a different lens or different glasses. You know, it's about the handrails, the ramps, the signs, the availability of space for spectators. And you know, of course, we could have found many other things that offered a lot of room for improvement. Actually, you know, it's important to see how many people are sensitive enough to be able to deal with creators with disabilities, what basic studies or implications are involved in dealing with a creator that has a disability or working with them. And in fact, you know, coming back to the question, if I look beyond the ramp, what are the concepts regarding disabilities, especially in the cultural field? It is often thought that only the blind people go to museums because there's Braille there, but others don't seem to go to museums. At least that seems to be the prevailing view. So what happened to me was that when I went to the Museum of Anthropology and History in Mexico City, there was a temporary exhibit, and it's true that at the entrance there was a screen and someone interpreting and translating everything that there would be at the Maya exhibition. And then you start to ask yourselves, you know, for example, you have these headsets that you can get when you go to museums that give you all the explanations, but there should also be a screen with someone who's doing the interpretation work for you to be able to see and understand everything. And in fact, I have chondroplasty. I'm a short person, and I have just seen an interview with another person like me from Saltillo, and I think at the Museum of Paleontology, she actually managed to get a tiny stool or bench, because what you do is you go to the museum and you're giving the tiny stool or bench in order to be able to climb onto it and see all of the exhibits, the models. And of course, that's very useful. And apart from the headset to hear the explanations, the audio guides, it is important to have the little stool. And a cultural manager needs to think of these things, has to actually engage in exercises of imagination and empathy, trying to step into someone else's shoes, basically. So if I were to come here using a wheelchair, what would I need? If I'm someone with Down syndrome, what would I need? Now, if I'm a little person, what do I need? And that's what Uncomfortable Look was about. It was about stepping into someone else's shoes and having an immersive experience for 10 to 15 minutes and trying to see how the day-to-day experience of a person with a disability is. And now, in this new phase I'm working in, always challenging assumptions, I ask myself what it is that I need. What it's about recognizing what I need. You know, it's about, for example, the little stool when I go to exhibitions. And this is not just for me, also for a child that goes to the museum. They can use the stool and see the exhibits. You know, you lower it a little bit. So it's about starting to imagine ways to include everyone. And we also need to challenge assumptions. In the festivals I've organized, the question always comes up with regard to accessibility as to whether if I'm a creator that needs certain things and include that in my production file, and this is also a good question for everyone watching, who should pay for that? The artist, the institution, or the one who is receiving it? Who should pay for all the things I need by way of accessibility measures? And we shouldn't be afraid to ask a question or say it, you know, even say, look, I need this and this and that. In my experience, I would need these things, and I need for the place I'm going to have this for me. Because if you do that, you can start imagining things differently, and you start seeing things a little beyond the ramp. It's not just that because you have a ramp, you can welcome everyone. It's not always the case that way.
Gracias, Sofía. Muy interesante.
Thank you so much, Sofia. Some very interesting thoughts you've shared with, and it's great that you help us all think about how talking accessibility goes well beyond the ramp. And I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to ask both of you what you think has been the greatest challenge you've encountered ever since you started promoting inclusion in the cultural sector, and how you've managed to overcome these issues over the years in terms of raising awareness among people. How have you managed to team up with other creators and cultural managers working on these matters? Look, I think the greatest hurdle those of us who are already converted, who try to preach to others, is about fear, the bias of this condescending look when it comes to disabilities, this perspective that is more focused on the limitations. So you need to convince each and everyone that there are lots of abilities rather than disabilities, but there's a lot of prejudice and bias. It's like a heavy burden on our shoulders, and often the perspective is very much focused on what the abilities are. So, you know, this can get in the way of people who want to actually carry out their projects within the cultural field. I don't know what you think, Sofia. I very much agree with Inés. I would say very often, do you have a minute to talk about this? And then you say, have you seen that your venue or that your project or artwork? You see, there's a mountain of prejudice that a person with a disability has to deal with on a day-by-day basis, and it's overwhelming. And visibility exercises, even if tiny, are good to start with. Based on my own experience, now being at the Culture Secretariat of the state for 2 years, towards the end of the pandemic, when we were already starting to get over it, we started introducing performances with Mexican Sign Language interpreters. 5 performances, not as many as I would have wished for, but we had them there. And the question that I kept getting, because these were not performances for children, that's also another taboo, you know, that accessibility issues should be related to sort of a lower level entertainment. It's just, you know, sort of brain candy entertainment. And no, they should also have a chance to be involved in other kinds of works that are not just about light entertainment.
So the question for me was that at first we had some individuals who were deaf and would come to the show, and they would feel that the show was addressing them, that they were being seen. And that, I think, the word got around. It's wonderful that this company has done this. It's not just a company, there's an entire program supporting this. But can I do this as a creator? Of course. You just need to approach them, find the interpreters, give them the text, and understand how this works. So that's what it means. We need to approach different forms of disability. Each one has its own features and requirements. So when we look at the world of a deaf person, we find the requirements, how the solutions and how much the solution is going to cost, and so on and so forth. So people were saying, it's wonderful that you're doing this. I didn't realize you could do this. And now persons who are deaf can come to the theater. Of course, this should not be a revelation. They should be able to have access and go anywhere. And during the pandemic, I went to a festival, which was virtual, and I went to see Bernarda Alba, which is a classic. But the way the performance was designed, it was by a UK company, and there was a stage, it was a round stage. But they were easy to access for the artists. They had ramps because they did have artists with different forms of disability. the British Sign Language interpreters were part of they were artists. They played the role of servants. And the actors themselves, Bernarda's youngest daughter was a deaf artist, and her mother spoke to her in sign language. And then you say, of course, this is an excellent example. It's a professional company which is showing us how things can actually be done, how we can integrate all these elements. Last year, I did go to the festival in the UK, and I was able to see different shows, and all the shows had closed captioning, and they also had sign language interpreters. We did use masks, but the masks had a feature so that you could see the lips. There was a relaxed room for anyone needing it, quiet room. It was a space that was open to anyone, and even the city itself. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but the city itself provided access, signing or signage. And it's an example. It's a very good example. It's not just saying they can do this at first world versus third world, but beyond that, when you look at the examples, and I think that's something the pandemic taught us. We're a village without boundaries. We could see each other. We could see what our neighbors were doing and how that could be done in our world, how it could benefit us. And where to start? Where to start implementing measures, or how to find ways to adapt measures. If I have no artist with disabilities, but I would like to have a broader project, what do I need? What tools can I use? And it's about us, what we can do. Approach them, ask them what they need, what they would like to do. That is how you enhance visibility. We should not have anyone in our societies who is still invisible. So we need to have active empathy exercises, engage the groups and see what they want, what they need, and see how we can start to change things. Thank you, Sofia. You answered one of the questions I was going to ask, and is how we can make access, how we can open access to persons with disabilities. How can this be done? Question is always, where do you start? Diversity and inclusion are also good for business. And how can culture play a role in this? As theaters, we are often asking ourselves, how can we bring in a bigger audience? How can we get visibility for a theater piece? And so this is also good business. So I would invite anyone who has questions to ask their questions in the chat. I'd say that creative and cultural industries have to be aware of what we're saying is that access to culture is a right. It is not charity, and it's not just a way to bring in more audiences. It's a right. And then something Sofia mentioned before in her presentation, we need to consider those who have disabilities. They account for 10% of the population, and they need access so that they can participate in cultural activities. So then you have about 40% of people who don't have disabilities per se, but they may be recent immigrants who don't speak the language fluently, or people whose hearing is impaired because of age. So all of these accessibility measures make it possible for them to participate more fully in cultural activities. Accessibility benefits everyone. It's comfortable. It's not uncomfortable for anyone. A ramp doesn't bother anyone. Closed captioning does not interfere with anyone's enjoyment, or having an interpreter is also not a barrier. And this is often not considered. It's often said that these measures are aimed at 10% of the population, overlooking the fact that the rest of the population can also benefit from these investments and enhanced accessibility. So when audience numbers grow, obviously that makes it visible. There's an economic benefit. And it's not just audience with disabilities, it's everyone who comes in. So the numbers do increase significantly. And it's interesting if we want to focus on the economic dimension of this. I was left thinking, I'd like to speak about numbers, because I think it gives us a very good starting point. The British Council in 2019 published a manual entitled Open Doors, which provides a snapshot. 2019, it's now 2023. I'd like to see more happen, but back in 2019, it was said that 35% of individuals with disabilities, the numbers differ, that there's a higher unemployment rate among those with disabilities. In my country, the numbers are significant. So that gives you a starting point, gives you a floor, and it's an economic issue. And Inés was just saying this. These are people who are already here, or already have a disability, but as people age, they will have disabilities. That's why it's important to have all these features, because our seniors are also experiencing changes, and they will end up with some form of disability, and they would have benefited from these measures, even if they don't need it today. In general terms, culture is a reflection of what we are, and I think that would be a good exercise for 2023. What do we want to show when it comes to culture? How do we see the world post-pandemic? We need to consider what happened to the community of persons with disabilities during the pandemic. Many of them had a hard time. Many of them lost their jobs, whether they had a disability or not. They were in lockdown. They had no mobility. So that brings up an entire series of questions. So what happened to them? What happened during this time? And what is happening now that it's behind us? We cannot keep saying the same things. We can't say, well, that's not up to me. Everyone, I think, needs to be involved, and we have always tried to enhance visibility. We have San Verbo, a company in Mexico. Eduardo is the director, and he is a deaf person. So now we have a professional actor who is deaf and also is the company director. Teatro Ciego is another example. It's Juan Carlos Saavedra. These are individuals who are blind, and they're not just actors, they're also producing theater. So that's something that is very important. It's beautiful to see them on stage because they bring a different sensitivity. But they should also be behind the scenes, producing, creating, making decisions. And that takes us into a different conversation. It's important for institutions to also hire individuals with disabilities, not just cleaning staff. No, they should have individuals who are making decisions, persons with disabilities. In 2021, 2022, I was able to work with Birds of Paradise. It's a company in the UK. And I got in touch with an actor, Jay Ria, who is deaf, and he wanted to be a producer. And that opened a different kind of conversation. He had been an actor, he'd already done that, and now he wanted to be a producer. And that opens up another conversation. The institution has to equip itself for that. If the person producing the project is going to have a disability, then we need to be able to communicate with him because he is the person who's going to be making decisions ultimately. I wanted to take some time to answer the questions that are coming into the chat. The first question is, how have theaters and cultural institutions reacted? Are they receptive? I would say that there is an awareness, growing awareness that we can't turn our backs on this, but there's still quite a bit of fear. We have a commission on inclusion and mediation in Spain because we had a meeting with different programmers and we asked them, what are you doing when it comes to inclusion? And one of them said something that shocked us. He said, I'm more afraid of doing it and doing it wrong than not doing it. So now there is so much judgment. Everyone is looking at the way people do things and criticizing things. So it's oftentimes, it's easier to say, better not to do anything than to do it and be criticized for it. So we thought it was important to be able to support them, to learn how to do things. There's never a guarantee that you're not going to make mistakes, but how to do this with the assurance that you're doing things properly. And this, I think, has been very helpful in helping them jump in and start taking steps in this direction. Here in Spain, that's how it is. I imagine things are different in Mexico, but in Spain, we can see that this is an issue that is on the table. There's no cultural space in Spain that doesn't have a policy to promote inclusion. They may not always apply it, but at least it is something that is being considered by all directors and managers of cultural spaces in Spain. In Mexico, I think there is both fear and curiosity. They want to know what they can do and how to do it. And also in Mexico City, we, in 2019, introduced something called funciones relajadas. And visibility works both ways. If you already have something, if you're afraid to make mistakes, if you're curious, and at least are willing to try, is important. But also, you need to announce that you're ready to do it, whether you're doing it well or not, whether you're halfway there. You still need to make this known so that you can receive feedback from the right individuals. You can have people say what you're doing is good, but it's not working for us. I think it is important to say what we're doing and say we're open, we're providing access, this event is for you as well. And I think that is another issue. Here in Guadalajara, we have a center that only has 4 seats for individuals in wheelchairs. What if more people come? Well, it's never happened. So it's important to announce or to make public what you do. So you should really make it known, because then we'll see changes and we'll see a different conversation. Thank you, Sofia. Thank you for that. We have a few questions about whether all of this is a requirement, if it's mandatory. We have 10 of the 26 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean with laws promoting and guaranteeing access to cultural spaces. But even those 10 countries have laws, it doesn't mean that those laws are enforced. So we do need to continue to promote and work for accessibility at all these festivals and events. All 26 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which does establish these accessibility measures as a right. And your thoughts, I think, are very interesting. Accessibility is essential for persons with disability, but it also benefits everyone else. So I did want to ask you about other roles. For example, universities, academia, what role can they play?
De la formación, quieres decir, ¿no?
You mean as far as training goes?
Well,
I think that is precisely the issue now. Sofia was speaking about all the creators who are interested in promoting their projects, developing projects. This has never been done. They were coming in through the back door, and now we're seeing more and more persons with disabilities leading projects. But if they don't have access to training, it's going to be hard to have high-level trained professionals who are able to lead these projects. So now the focus, I would say, should be on training in general, but especially artistic training. We need to make sure there's equal access. We cannot allow any training sectors not to be ready to admit individuals with disabilities simply because they are not equipped to do so. We need to focus our energies on that now. I entirely agree. Here in Mexico, for example, you mentioned the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In Mexico, it was ratified in 2008. So that's why I like the narrative. We need to see where we are and where we're headed. In 2011, the general law for the inclusion of persons with disabilities was enacted. 2011, only 12 years. So looking back, as Inés said, the issue now is going to be education. And it's important to approach education with a different approach. We should not be excluding anyone. In Mexico, we have choices, public or private education, but for persons with disabilities, it's more complicated. And it depends on the disability. And if persons with disabilities want to be artists, then things are even more difficult when it comes to training or starting a career. When I started, I was always seen as stubborn because I would always ask, what's the theory? How did you learn? I would ask the creators, where did you start? What was your starting point? Or what do you base your arguments on? Fortunately or unfortunately, there is no theory. But that is a good thing. If it doesn't exist, then we can create it. You can use theories or techniques from the masters, but you have to apply them based on your own experience as a creator with disabilities. So that is your starting point. Then you can write, then you can put this on paper. And I think it's important to start there and test our theories and also think of those who come behind us. My experience has not been bad. I was able to get into any workshops I was interested in. Nobody ever closed the door in my face, and I did everything I wanted to do without any issues. But there were some things I wish I didn't have to do, or things I wish had been easier. And now we have technology. And that's why it's important to look back at history. Now we have technology that changes so fast. We have new platforms, new possibilities. Given that that is the reality, why don't we see this reflected in the education system, for example? So again, that is where we need to start to provide access for all. We are increasingly surprised by all these changes brought about by technology, and they can be cost effective. We often think that many of these things are very expensive to achieve, but technology has made it possible for us to do a lot at a very low cost. I'd like to invite our audience to download the IDB publication entitled We Are All. We're sharing the link in the chat so that you can download it, so that you can understand this better. It would take too much time to explain. I'd like to ask the panelists to leave us with two thoughts you would like our audience to take away from this very interesting conversation.
Bueno, yo creo que es importante que entendamos.
Well, I think it is important for us to understand that when we speak about inclusion, what we're saying is that we have to adapt the environment to individuals. We have set some standards based on what is most common, not what is best. So in order to have equal access, we need to change the standards we have as a society. It's not the persons with disabilities who have to become superheroes so that they can be full-fledged members of society. So we need to understand that being inclusive means adapting the environment to the needs of individuals. And then what we said before about accessibility, all of us, as we get older, are going to have some form of disability. So any measures we implement now will benefit us in the future. So even if it's a selfish way of looking at things, at least it's a starting point, because we need to understand that we need to make our society as accessible as possible. There's something I'd like to share very quickly. At the No Limit Festival at the UK, I heard a phrase, and it was that whether we like it or not, or rather, it was a phrase that said how, looking at economic or social policies, says that we need to have this conversation not with the same white people, old white people they mentioned. These are the people who are making decisions right now about the future. But that is only for now, because we need to think that we should be in those positions at some point, or people who look like us. So for now, you may be fighting because those positions are held by those individuals. But if we don't start doing these empathy exercises, we're going to be stuck. How many more years is it going to take for us to make changes? So we need to start to work. And there's a concept which is that we are activists. I think we are, whether we are aware of it or not, because we are giving voice or visibility to others So we need to speak to those who are in those positions. I also read a phrase about protocols for special performances, and this was some years ago. And it was that integration means inviting everyone to the party. That is what integration means. But inclusion is when you look at the other person in the eyes and says, shall we dance? Because of course you can say we do have ramps. So that means you're all invited, but you're not really dancing with them. You're just going down your checklist. We have this, but you're not really dancing at the party. So that means that you're not being inclusive. So that is what we need. We need to change the chip, find information. I mentioned the number of companies, and I also put some things in the chat. I can share links later so that you can see what others are doing and how you can start doing things where you are as well. I love it. Thank you very much, Sofia. Thank you to Inés also for sharing your experience and for all the examples you have shared with us. Thank you for the work you do. And thank you for working in your fields to promote accessibility that is going to benefit all of us in the end. So here at the IDB, we do believe that it's possible to build a world of collaboration with creative industries. We believe this is feasible. And there are 4 fundamental pillars we know we can work on simultaneously in a cross-cutting way to make sure that all of those projects and performances will be available to all audiences. And these pillars could be, and I would ask for your help in defining them, I would say they're infrastructure, communication, content, and of course, human capital. So from the IDB, we are committed to promoting accessibility in Latin America and the Caribbean. We will continue to do research, to work with other industries as well, and to generate data. We thank both of you again for being with us today, as well as all those who joined us. Please take 2 minutes of your time to answer the survey using the QR code on the screen. You can also download a digital credential for having been a part of this event. We will be sharing this information in the chat, and we thank you in advance because your opinions can help us make better decisions in the future. Thank you. Goodbye.